The President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has arrived in India for a traditional annual summit. It's the second time President Putin is stepping outside of Russia after skipping visits to the G20, the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, and rescheduling his planned tour of China. Prime Minister Narendra Modi stood outside the summit venue in the national capital to welcome his old friend, President Vladimir Putin. The Russian president arrived with his entourage and stepped out to shake hands with the Indian Prime Minister. The two leaders then walked ahead for a quick photo op before heading in for the much-awaited bilateral talks. Prime Minister Modi then welcomed the president inside the venue as the two leaders sat down for a short press conference, which saw them showering kind words and appreciation upon one another. Reports suggest that at least 10 bilateral agreements are to be signed, aiming to boost the India-Russia strategic partnership. This in-person visit to India highlights the significance Russia places on bilateral ties with its traditional ally, India. This bilateral summit comes despite New Delhi's growing closeness to Washington. According to reports, Russia and India will sign 10 bilateral agreements in various areas, including some semi-confidential ones following the talks. The meeting is also likely to see the presentation of Russia's S-400 air defense system to India. According to reports, the two countries are likely to sign a deal for the supply of AK-203 assault rifles to India. Despite the changing geopolitical equations, Delhi and Moscow have remained closest of allies. But some areas of difference will be difficult to ignore, given the fact that both Russia and India are sliding towards different partners due to the ongoing geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China. A possible clash of ideas regarding the security of the Indo-Pacific region and the re-emergence of the Quad group comprising Australia, Japan, the US and India. We are joined now by our correspondent Stuart Smith, WION's man in Moscow. Stuart, thanks very much for being with us today. President Putin has flown down to New Delhi for a few hours to hold this bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Modi. He has skipped major diplomatic summits and other meetings this year because, of course, of the COVID-19 pandemic. What does this signify, the mere fact that he's travelled to Delhi for these talks?
Well, we know that President Putin has received his booster shot, his third dose of the Sputnik V vaccine. So he is slightly more protected than he might have been earlier in the year. But I do think there is more going on than this. We know that the last time these two leaders met in this format was 2019, so it's been a while. And as you said, this geopolitical situation, the seemingly big change in the shift with the India looking towards the United States and Russia looking more towards China, is likely part of it. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, mentioned this himself. He said that we've witnessed many fundamental changes and different kinds of geopolitical equations are emerging, but this friendship of India and Russia remains constant. And the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, when discussing the purchase by India of the S-400 missile system, did explicitly address this idea as well, that he says India is showing, it is making clear it is a sovereign country by agreeing to this purchase with the potential of US sanctions on the back of it, and that it's more than just a symbolic message. India will be able to make good use of these air defense missiles in India. The problem for India is that the implication with India buying these missiles from Russia is that China could become unhappy. China and India have strained relations recently, whereas Russia is looking for closer relations with China.
Stuart, let's just dig into that a bit more, because India is continuing to engage with Russia for defence supplies. The S-400 alone sparks the real risk of American sanctions or at least American disapproval. What's the Kremlin's view on all of that?
Well, I couldn't quite catch you there, but in terms of the other issues they may be looking at, we know there are 10 deals to be signed overnight in India, and many of these relate to trade and investment. But we're also looking at space cooperation, such as dealing with both respective countries having global positioning systems in each other's countries for their own global positioning systems. The contracts looking at cultural agreements between the two nations. And we know that the COVID-19 collaboration between the two nations has been particularly high, with Russia unable to manufacture its own Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccines to the quantity that it needed within the country. And so India has been fundamental in providing hundreds of millions of doses of that Sputnik V vaccine. But they're also looking at hydrocarbon trade and export, with Russia providing hydrocarbons to India, potentially from the Arctic continental shelf, which it's keen to exploit. The other final is the contracts around economic investment, which President Putin directly referenced, saying that bilateral trade between the two nations has risen by 38% over the last year.
An interesting balance sheet developing. Stuart Smith, WION's reporter in Moscow. Thank you very much indeed for that. Also joining us today from Moscow is Alexei Zakharov. He is a research fellow at the School of International Affairs at Moscow's Higher School of Economics. Mr. Zakharov, thanks to you as well for being on the programme today. Looking at the geopolitical landscape and the new conflicts that are kind of dominating that landscape, how do you see the future of the Indian-Russia relationship?
Good evening. Well, first of all, given the geopolitical uncertainties going on in the world, I think it's essential for Russia and India to keep together and to try to develop this relationship. And I think that the visit by Vladimir Putin is aimed actually at keeping this relationship afloat and at showing that India is still a very important partner for Russia, especially given its difficult relationship with the West.
And how does Russia view India's engagement with the United States and its allies? Is the Kremlin to any extent trying to drive a bit of a wedge between India and the United States here by deepening Russia's ties with India at the beginning of a week, of course, that is going to see President Biden hosting his Summit of Democracies just on Thursday?
Well, of course, the India-US reproachment has been a point of concern for Russia, especially in terms of, US as a competitor in Indian defense market. We have seen that the US share of exports to India has been growing, while the Russian share, has been kind of fluctuating, even with some periods of decrease. And of course, I think that Russian officials are sensitive to this. Another point of concern is a kind of political affinity between India and the United States. Their closeness on different topics, like on the Indo-Pacific, which is Russia wary of. But I think that Russia should understand that India has its own set of bilateral relationship, and the US is an important partner for India, not only geopolitically or not only security reasons. It's also important in terms of a burgeoning economic partnership between the two countries. That's why I think that Russian officialdom should understand is that India is naturally interested in pursuing its own relationship with the United States that does not intervene in its relations with Russia.
We're at the beginning of a very interesting week. Alexei Zakharov, live from Moscow. Thanks so much for your time today. I hope we'll talk to you again soon.